with something like a 400-meter race, like, you know it's short, you know it's going to be over, but it's just excruciating the whole time through. And then so I find it's harder to like be at that like peak top speed and like hold that when there's so much like pain and you're about to throw up and like your heart's beating out of your chest and like all these different things. Most of the success that I've ended up having in ultra running and ultra racing is just that ability to kind of like keep things even keeled, that like the lows can be super, super low. There's been plenty of times I've been in tears in the middle of the wilderness by myself of like giving up, like can't keep doing this. And then 10 minutes later, you're running again, 4.5 minute kilometers or something. They're really low. They're really awful, but you can work through that. And you always know that there's going to be something positive on the other side of it. You kind of build this repertoire of like getting through those lows and then getting to the finish line. And almost every race, when you get to the finish line, no matter how awful you felt at some point during the race, you get there and you're like, I probably could have went a little bit harder.
For this episode of Energy Untold, I was joined by Scott Cooper. Scott is one of Canada's top ultramarathon runners. During the 2023 season, he won the Divide 200, a 200-mile or 322-kilometer race with over 12,000 meters of elevation gain, the Sinister 7 Ultra, and the 50K category of the Calgary Marathon. During the 2024 season, he finished fourth at the Canyons Run, which qualified him for the UTMB Mont-Blanc this past August. In this episode, we talk about his training, what it feels like to be in some of these races, and of course, we had to talk about hallucinations. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Scott Cooper. I think a good place to start would actually be, can you pinpoint the time where you fell in love with running?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I've always ran.
Okay.
Like always. Like I can remember back to being a kid and being 10 years old, and I'd take my dog for a run just through like a 1K loop through the trail beside my house. Grew up in the forest, essentially.
Yeah.
And just always loved running. And then track and field in elementary school got me a little bit more focused on, I guess, performance side running.
Yeah.
So I would start in grade 3 or grade 4, so however old that is.
Yeah.
10 or 11.
Yeah.
And then, but I've always ran. And then I played a ton of sports all through school, and I was good at the ones where you had to be a fast runner. So that's kind of what I gravitated to. But just always loved it.
And then like what distances, what did you compete in? And
Yeah. So as a kid, it was everything. Like it was just, I would do everything from the 100-meter to I think we did up to 800-meter. And then we would have cross country that would be 3 or 5K, whatever it is at that age. So I would do any sort of race like that.
Yeah.
When I got into high school, I kept doing track. Myself and one of my friends kind of helped create a track club because our school didn't even have one. So we had to like find a teacher that was willing to support us doing track. We had a track at our school, but no program.
What high school was this?
It's called Banting Memorial in Alliston, which is like an hour north of Toronto, an hour and a half north of Toronto.
Yeah.
So we would just try and put things together. It was kind of like a guerrilla track club. Like we didn't have a bus to any track meets. It was like parents, like my mom would drive us and carpool there and stuff. And then through all high school, it was I did short distance stuff. So mostly 400-meter was like my event. Threw up after every single race. It was just an absolute nightmare. And then at the very end,
what is the nightmare distance?
To me, 400 meters.
400 meters is the nightmare.
Because you have to sprint the whole thing. Like there's no option but sprinting, and it's like too far to unless you're an Olympian, it's too far to really sprint. Yeah. So you just blow up in the last 100-meter home stretch, and you're fully anaerobic. Everything burns, and it's about a little under a minute to run. Yeah. So it's it's long enough that you're just surviving the whole time. Yeah. So it was brutal. But then the last year of high school, I did some 1,500-meter and 3,000. And started like very back of the pack. I was way behind, and then would run through everyone during the whole race. And then that's sort of when I realized that probably endurance, longer stuff would be maybe a little up my alley. And I stopped throwing up as much anyways. Okay.
So when did you, I guess, continually add distances? Like from 3,000, how do you move to halves and fulls? Like, what does that progression look like?
Everything like this? Yeah. So once I got into university, I'd always been interested by doing triathlon. And then so I did a first sprint triathlon It would have been in like maybe second year university. It was 2008, I believe, or 2009. And then it was just interesting to me ever since I'd seen Simon Whitfield win in Sydney Olympics gold medal years ago. I think that was 2000.
Yeah.
It was just like a sport that always struck me. So that was my first real endurance sport introduction.
Yeah.
So did sprint triathlons for a year, and then did Olympic triathlons the next year, then half Ironmans the year after that. And then from then on, there was about 5 years that I was pretty focused on just doing Ironman racing.
Yeah.
And then so that was what got me into more of the like extreme endurance. Like then you're talking about races that are 9 hours long.
Yeah.
I'd done a couple marathons, like standalone marathons during that time as well.
During that build, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was kind of a like a frog boiling water situation where it was just like everything just got a little bit longer. I remember the first sprint triathlon I did, I saw people with Ironman tattoos. I'm like, there's no way. Like these people are insane. Like, how would you ever be able to do it?
Yeah.
And then fast forward 3 years and I was there doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
But it was always the with the endurance stuff anyways, it's always been the push to try and like see what that next limit is. So even when I did my first sprint triathlon, it was completely overwhelming. And I remember I was like stuck in I couldn't get my shirt on and off in the transition, and like had my parents yelling at me like, this is a race, like you're supposed to be doing this quickly. And like just trying to get through it. But then realizing like, yeah, I survived and like it wasn't that bad and like did pretty well. So then it just always became like, well, where is the limit? Like how far could I go? How fast can I go? And it just, grew from there.
Was every incremental goal roughly a year out, or like?
At the beginning, for sure.
Yeah.
It was just kind of natural. Like I would do so the year I was doing sprint triathlons, I did 2 or 3 like early on in the summer. And then the idea of an Olympic distance triathlon, there was one in Montreal, which is where I went to school for when I was going back to school. And I was like, well, you know what? Like maybe I'll build up to that through the whole year. And then I did the Olympic and like made it through and survived.
Yeah.
And so then the next year when I was planning, I was like, okay, I'll try and do a bunch of Olympic triathlons throughout the year. And then maybe go for that like half Ironman distance at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So it always just kind of naturally built that way, that I would kind of focus on whatever I'd done one of the year before. I'd do a few of those building up to the big event, which would be that next distance stepping up.
And then what was the deciding point, I guess, to transition from Ironman into ultras?
Yeah, so like I said, I was in Montreal, so that's where I did all my schooling. And then I moved out to Calgary and I was working in Cochrane in 2018. And then by that point, I'd done tons of Ironman stuff and raced all over the world. And I kind of just was looking for a change. And I think there's a lot of time staring at a black line at the bottom of a pool and staring at a watch doing intervals on the bike and run. And then when I moved here, friends of mine were doing the relay at the Sinister 700-mile race outside of Calgary. And that like 2 weeks before, they told me that one of their friends got a stress fracture and we were out for a beer. Yeah. And they were like freaking out of like, how are we going to find someone to do this leg? And it was 23 or 24K. And I was like, I haven't really ran on trails, but like whatever, it's like a half marathon. How bad could it be? And came back just like covered in mud and dirty, but just absolutely loved it. So that was pretty much my first real trail run, was doing that leg of that race. And then,
sorry, what year was that? The 2020?
That would have been 2018.
18,
okay.
Believe,
yeah.
Okay.
And then so that was my first experience and like absolutely loved it. And then ended up signing up for a 100-kilometer race later that year, which was the Black Spur Ultra. Yeah. And then from then just like never looked back.
No, okay. Wow. Okay. Right away went into the 100K and then, okay.
Yeah. But like went into the 100K, but I had the experience of doing, like I said, like 9-hour races with Ironman. So it wasn't completely out of the realm of possibility. Yeah. But it was, when I signed up for it, I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this, but like, why not try? Yeah. And so I jumped into it.
Okay. I do want to come back to a bunch of the races that you've done and results. But I want to back up and just talk through training. Mm-hmm. And I guess, what does the typical training week look like for you? And then I guess connected to that, what are your KPIs? Is it around kilometers? Is it around time on foot? Is it around elevation gain? Like, just walk me through this, your methodology.
Like. Yeah. So the methodology is always race specific. So it's for what I'm training for. Generally speaking, if you're talking about like KPI style, it would be based on kilometers is usually the easiest thing. Yeah. Just to keep a judge, it's easier to track in something like Strava or even just on your watch or whatever.
Yeah.
So kilometers would be sort of the key. I think like fundamentally, I try and move every day. So that's sort of one of the foundational points. And I find if I am always doing some sort of endurance sport every day, like if you consistently do that for my case over 15, 20 years, it all adds up to having a really strong system that can push through these races. So really focus on the consistency, and then from there, typically just based on the race. So giving this year as an example, at the early part of the year, it was going to be a race in April, so coming out of Canadian winter. So it's snowy everywhere in the trails. It's hard to find places to run. So the focus was really just on getting the miles. We knew that the race wasn't super hilly. And like, again, this is all relative, but it was a 100-mile race with only 4,000 meters of elevation gain, which like isn't that much when you spread it out over the distance. So it wasn't really about the vert, because it was hard to get vert because there was meters of snow in the Rockies. But we could focus on, just that building of distance through the training program. So that was just really focused on mileage versus towards the end of the year, I did a race in Chamonix, UTMB, and that one's 10,000 meters over 100 miles, but about 100 miles. So much more intense in terms of elevation. So then the training program switched to cumulative vert per week. So looking at a week, it would be, starting off at 7,000 meters vert per week, maybe adding 1,000 meters per week as you're going through those build cycles to, I think the biggest week was 12,500 meters of vert in the week. So whatever that worked out in miles of distance didn't really matter because, maybe you would be 30 kilometers or 40 kilometers shorter than the biggest week in a flatter build, if you called it that. But then there was an extra 7,000 meters of vert that wasn't in that week before.
And then given that you've got several years of base behind you, typically how many months ahead of a race would you start, I guess, getting kind of race specific? I mean, this season, and I do want to come back to Chamonix for sure. Because my guess is that that's the big goal of the year, but you've got other races ahead of that. So what is that? How many months or weeks, I guess, ahead of a build are you like kind of more race specific?
So really race specific. So like I mentioned, the race, and had to do well at the race in April to qualify for Chamonix and UTMB, which was the goal of the season. So it was like you had to do enough early season to qualify, but also not burn yourself out so that you can't train through the summer for the big race. But probably in earnest, starting in like December, was getting into a little bit more of a structured program. With like by say January, so at that point, you're 3-4 months out to be like focused on the race. And then same thing after that race, took about 4 to 6 weeks where it was a little bit loose with the way training was. Let the body recover. If there's little aches and pains or just like burnout from doing a lot of the running constantly, let your body recover from that. And then it was about I would say 2.5 or 3 month build again, a very specific training, like I said, of being focused on, have to have this much vert every week and build that up in a systemic way.
How long after a race do you find you need to kind of just take some time to taper, relax, recover?
Depends on the race, for sure. From a 100-mile race.
I was going to say, like your average 100-mile race.
Just the average 100-miler. It's usually about 2 weeks of like really super low intensity of, just keeping your body moving. Like I said, I just like to move every day. So usually I'd focus more on, if I'm at home, like focus on biking, for example, and just get out on my bike, go around on a loop on the river path or something. And then after about 2 weeks, you can start getting back into things a little bit, and probably 3 to 4 weeks before you're like actually thinking about anything that's kind of truly race or sport specific. But that can all just depend on how hard the race is, how hard you pushed yourself, conditions of the race, like all those different factors. But I'd say usually 3 to 4 weeks. I remember I was once told it's for every hour you race, it's a day of recovery is like kind of what you should plan for.
Okay. And then, for a 100-miler build, how many kilometers are you kind of getting up into for a week of training?
So in the season, or in sort of like generally, I'll get up to about 215 to 235 kilometers is typically like my biggest week. And then those might also have 3,000 to 5,000 meters of elevation gain. And then again, like when I was focused on just vert for something like UTMB, I think my biggest week was 190-ish kilometers, but then it was like 12,500 meters of vert.
I mean, that's a lot of hours on foot too.
So it was probably 30 hours of running in that week or something like that.
are you working with a coach at this point, or are you designing everything yourself?
Yeah, I do my own programming. Yeah.
Okay.
So back when I was doing Ironman racing, I had an amazing coach out of Montreal, and he works as like a high performance coach for some of the pro cycling teams. And he coached me, but taught me the fundamentals of coaching.
Okay.
And then so sort of over the years, it went from Paulo being my coach to him handing over the torch and allowing me to coach myself. And then he would just be kind of a sounding board for me.
Yeah.
And then, by the time I left Montreal, I would just kind of like do my own thing and use all the principles that he had taught me.
Okay. So you're coaching yourself. Walk me through this. You're opening up a spreadsheet, like whatever, several months ahead of a race.
Yep.
And then, walk me through how this looks.
How it all
like
comes
how
together.
What are you putting in the cells?
Yeah. So it's, like you said, it's just an Excel spreadsheet. It's nothing fancy. Usually what I'll do is I'll lay out all the weeks. So however many weeks it's going to be beforehand that I'll be starting a program, lay that all out to the race. And then I usually work backwards from the race. So, start with saying, okay, I'll need this many weeks to taper. This is the week that I want to have the biggest volume, and then set a goal for what that would look like. So like I mentioned, whether that's just the distance of whatever 230 kilometers is the right thing, or this much vert. And then from there, I just work it back in blocks of saying, how do I break this up to have consistent blocks, like usually 2 to 3 weeks on, 1 week off.
Mm-hmm.
And then just make sure that following like basic principles in terms of like, you don't want to add 30% to your volume from 1 week to the next. If you're going to do that, you're going to get injured.
Yeah.
So like there's rules of like, maybe 10 to 20% increases in volume, or
rules that work for general rules, but also rules that work for you.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that there's certain things I can skip through that would be like traditional guidance, but like I can jump straight into big weeks usually, as long as I don't have too much intensity. And I just know my body can do that from so many years of doing this.
Yeah.
And then from there, I put in like the major structure of this is the goal of whether it's by volume of kilometers, time, vert, like whatever my training goal is towards that biggest week of training.
Yep.
And then from there, break it down to specific workouts within each of those weeks. So usually focused on 1 to 2 long runs on a weekend, some sort of interval. Usually it's more speed work at the beginning of the year, heading towards more like just tempo type work later in the year, just based on the mix of volume and intensity. Yeah. And then just recovery runs in between that make it add up to the volume that I'm looking for.
Right. So out of those 7 days, how many days would you consider to be kind of just easy days or easy to moderate days?
Yeah, probably 3 or 4 of them.
Okay.
3 or 4. Yeah. And there'd be the big workouts on the weekends, which like honestly aren't that hard. They're just long. Yeah. Like they're hard because they're long.
Yeah.
And then there's probably only one like real intensity day in the week, maybe 2, but it would depend sort of on the cycle, like where you're at. Like I said earlier on, when the volume's less, usually I'll have maybe 2 of those harder days, like maybe one that's like hard hills and one day that's hard just like tempo on the bike path where it's going to be flat and you're worked on speed. Yeah. And then that might just morph into a little bit less as you get closer to the race when you're doing so many miles and the race is not dependent as much on like top end speed. I'll do a little bit less of that hard stuff.
Yep. And are you doing, during the week, are you doing a lot of 2-a-days or mostly just once a day?
Usually just once a day, if I can, and when it works, twice a day. But just with having everything else in life, it's just easier if I can put all my eggs into like this next hour and a half is when I'm working out. Yeah. And then I can go back to work and life and family and all of that.
Strength, yoga, anything else on top of that?
As much as I can. As a classic endurance athlete, you always end up prioritizing just running. Yeah. And I'm still young, I know, but like as I get older, I think it's more important to focus on those things. Yeah. In earlier years, I did a lot of it because I had time as I was a grad student when I was doing Ironman racing and I could fit all this in. Yeah. And I think it's the way to do it. But usually what I would try and do early in the season when you're not running quite as much, so you have a bit more time, do either yoga or a strength session every day. So it'd end up being a few strength workouts, a few yoga sessions per week on top of the training. But then once you're running 30 hours a week, like you just start running out of hours and energy. And, then I'm lucky if it's like a couple strength workouts, maybe like some stretching in front of the TV before bed or something like that. But like a little bit less, less consistent.
And then how have you calibrated, I want to go through this a little bit more. How have you calibrated elevation gain in a week compared to a race? Like, how have you figured out what that right amount of climbing is?
Yeah. And I don't know if there's ever a good answer for that.
Yeah.
Usually what I find is I kind of know as I'm going through things. I try and get in some big days that are going to approach the total elevation that you're going to have in the race at some point. So for a race like Sinister 700 miler, which is one I've done a few times, it's about 6,500 meters of elevation gain.
Yep.
So I'd really like to have some days in there that are getting up to like maybe 4,500 meters in a day or 4,000 meters in a day. So you're at least doing, say, 2/3 of the
2/3.
elevation.
Okay. Yeah.
And then looking at it, like I'll try and also do like a really big, my last weekend that I'll tend to do will be a back-to-back of 2 long runs. And ideally, if everything goes well, try and get about 2/3 to 3/4 of the total distance of the race. And the same thing, 2/3 to 3/4 of the total elevation, or in a best case scenario,
within 2 days?
Within 2 days, or even do the full elevation if it works out that way.
And that would be roughly 2 weeks before the race?
Usually,
tapering from there, or
usually more like 3 or 4 weeks out.
Okay.
Just because it is a pretty huge load, like your body's pretty beat up. So usually I like to do that last really big weekend, take a week of like super, super chill and let everything start to settle out. And then a week where you maybe do a little bit of activation, a little bit of speed, a longish run in there. And then the week after that would be the race week. So that would be my ideal if I could control all the variables situation.
What does your last taper week look like? Just
like the race week?
Yeah.
Yeah. So usually like 2 days before a race, I usually try and do nothing. That's like a pretty like consistent for any race that I do. Day before, just like an easy 30-minute shakeout.
Yeah.
And then I'll try and do a few things that week where it might just be like a 10K run where I'll do some, 1 or 2 minute pickups in pace just to kind of get the body going. But yeah, really just like letting the body chill and relax.
And then what are some of your favorite like 25 to 40K routes in and around Calgary? Because we've got like kind of an embarrassment of riches here, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I would say some of the regulars, like so doing something in West Bragg Creek, like there's a bunch of loops through there that can be done. So that's pretty easy. There's a good loop to do Powder Face and Prairie Mountain.
Yep.
It's sort of near Elbow Falls there, so that's a pretty regular one.
Yep.
This year we were doing a bit more stuff in Canmore just because of the nature of needing so much vert.
Yeah.
So like going out and like doing Grotto twice or something like that where it's, you can get close to 3,000 meters of vert and 30K of running in.
Yeah.
So that would be a bit of a regular. But yeah, those are sort of probably the
training
common
ones. But yeah. What about for kind of just like the picturesque, like quintessential?
Oh, having a super fun time.
Yeah.
Not just just training. Yeah, it's a good question. So doing rock wall, which that's a little bit longer. That one's like 50K, but totally would recommend that.
Yeah.
Doing something, a really nice area is going up through like Sunshine and Healy Pass towards Egypt Lakes is really nice. Mm-hmm. If you got time for a really long day, doing Sunshine to Mount Shark through Assiniboine. That's one of my like all-time favorites, but that's like a really, really big day.
Yeah.
Those would probably be some of the top ones. And then some of the stuff around Banff, like even just I did Cascade Mountain for the first time this year and it was super beautiful. So I'd recommend that one. Bourgeot's like a good bang for the buck.
Yeah.
You get right up really high and beautiful views. I think that's like 1,600 or 1,700 meters of vert and 22K or so for a round trip. Yeah. But you get up high right away. So that one's a really, like I said, good bang for the buck.
Northover was my big
in Northover.
goal for this summer until I got hurt. That was like the one thing I wanted to.
Have you done it before?
I have not, no.
Oh, yeah, that one's, and I haven't been able to do it the last few years. Like timing hasn't worked out.
Yeah.
Friends did it a couple weeks ago, but I was away for business, so I couldn't join. But
I guess it was still in. Yeah.
Yeah, and like it was just absolutely gorgeous. So that one's a beautiful one. I forgot about that, but that would also be a top one. And one that recently this year I hadn't done before, but going through Mount Allen was really nice. So you can either go from the 1A, like go from the highway near Canmore, or you can go from Ribbon Falls. And yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a really nice area.
This is good. We'll continue to compare notes. And then, I guess going back to the taper and then your 2 days off, what are you doing to fuel during those 2 days?
Like the 2 days immediately before the race?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do a low res diet is what it's called, like low residue diet. So you try and essentially get carbs. You want carbs in for sure. Like it's just a standard for endurance racing, but you try and limit anything that's high in fiber. So it's the whole idea is that you kind of like clear out your whole system.
Yeah.
So usually I just eat white rice. I make it into fried rice. So just like fried in a pan with soy sauce, a
Yeah.
little bit of chicken in there for protein.
Yeah.
And then that's like the majority of what I eat for the 2 days before. So it's super
Just
bland.
just the same thing. And
Yeah.
just,
So I'll have that for lunch and dinner for like both like the 2 days before.
yeah.
And then for breakfast, maybe just some eggs and maybe like fried potatoes or something like that. But again,
Yeah.
things that are really easy to digest and
Yeah.
not much fiber or anything. And then it's like super bland, super boring. But come race day, I haven't dealt with many GI problems ever since I've switched to starting to do that. So yeah, knock on wood. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Okay. So still like a lot of carbs, even based within a race where you're going to eat through them pretty quick. But I guess you're obviously throughout the race, you're refueling nonstop.
Mm-hmm.
So how many calories are you trying to down in an hour, and what are you eating during the race?
Yeah, and then so I find that that's a bit of a moving target. When I did Ironman racing, I did it like super, super prescribed. Like this is exactly what I'm going to eat, and know how many calories I could take in. But it's a bit more of a controlled environment.
Yeah.
Whereas what I find with ultras, because you're going from say like a super long steep climb to a really fast descent, like you're getting affected by the terrain in terms of where your heart rate's at, how just logistically easy it is to eat. Like if you're climbing up rocks, you don't have your hands to put food in your mouth. Or the same thing if you're running at, like 18K an hour on a downhill because it's like perfect grade and it's super fast. Like again, it's not as easy to be taking in food.
Yeah.
So I try and be a little bit more loose with that. But typically what I'll take in is it's probably about 500 calories an hour. I think would be 300 to 500 calories, something like that.
Yeah.
So I really like Spring Energy Gel.
Yeah.
So usually I'll take in.
That's like the applesauce type stuff, right?
Yeah, awesome sauce. Yeah, and that's why it's great. It's like when you're sick as a kid and you just eat applesauce and it's great. When you're sick and not feeling great as an adult doing an ultra marathon, it's like just as perfect. So I'll usually eat a couple of those per hour. And then there's some contention about how much calories are in them. I don't know if you know that drama, but
no,
it's maybe a story for another day. But they're supposed to have 180 calories in them.
Yeah.
Probably more like say 100 or something like that. But maybe 2 to 250 calories from those, and then I'll be drinking something. Usually, like I'll pack my own Gatorade, like it's just simple and works.
Yeah.
And then I'll just drink whatever electrolyte and carb drink they have on the course.
Yeah.
And there might be another couple hundred calories from that in terms of a bottle or two of those per hour.
But not a lot of solids.
No. Like, and I'll rotate solids in. Everything from like the odd Snickers bar as a little bit of a treat, or sometimes just like a Cliff Bar or some sort of granola-ish type based bar. A little bit of solid food definitely goes a long way just to keep the stomach settled.
Yeah.
But I've done some races where I've done nothing but awesome sauce for essentially the whole race, and it's gone okay. So yeah.
Clearly you're just using it as fuel and you're just fine with, I'm just doing the same thing. I don't need to have different flavors. No, this is like utilitarian.
Yeah. And again, it's just part of ultra running is that it's a lot of time of just doing the same thing. Like you got to be okay with monotony. Like the training is just getting up and going running every day.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with nutrition. It's just like you find what works, and especially in a race setting, just like kind of click through it. And then like when I'm at different checkpoints and whatever, I'll grab a handful of chips or, like Rice Krispie squares or something I might make before that I'll get from like my wife if she's crewing. And if something just looks good, I'll take a handful and eat it.
Yeah.
I also like packing the little mini Cokes.
Yeah.
Like the ones that are just like, I think they're 200 mils or something.
Yeah.
So I'll usually keep one of those in my packs at all the time. And then if I'm ever having a low, I'll just crack a Coke and...
That's your treat?
That's a little treat to keep you going. It's amazing what a Coke can do 2 a.m. when you feel awful.
Any little sodium tablets or?
Depends on how hot the race is.
Okay.
So if it's something where it's a hot race, really sunny, usually I can tell just by like how much sweat's on my shorts and on my shirt.
Yeah.
If you're starting to see those sweat stains, then like you're losing a lot of salt.
Yeah.
And then I'll start rotating those into like maybe every couple hours or so I'll take one and just drink it with lots of water and get it down.
Okay.
Yeah, and then another little tidbit of a trick that I've found that works really well is ginger Gravol. So like the not gravel, but just like their ginger capsules. And like you could do whatever brand. I don't know, guess I'm plugging gravel.
Yeah.
But but I take those throughout the race, and like maybe every couple hours or a few hours, just pop one of those, and it just helps keep your stomach settled. So you've got so many calories going through and blood not being in your stomach, so it makes it harder to digest.
Okay.
So some of those in there just help kind of keep it an even keel to avoid some of that nausea that you can end up feeling, especially in the really long races.
Okay.
So you can tuck that one in your back pocket.
That's a good one. And then how do you determine pacing during a race?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's much different in a road race where you do all the preparation. You're roughly going off of how you know within bounds, like how fast you're going to be able to go on a particular day. But it's obviously not the same in trail because there's so many variables. One, just obviously elevation, how steep the terrain is it smooth terrain? So how do you work through that? Are you just going off of heart rate? Like what? Yeah, walk me through your pacing methodology.
Going through that, and like the short and not great answer is that just I've done it for so many years that I've got like a pretty good feel for it.
Yeah.
So I have a good just like sense of like, can I do this all day?
Like how much do I have in the tank?
Yeah, and I've done enough races to know that like if I feel like this at this point, like this is a definite red flag, like slow down, or vice versa. Like, oh, I feel really good, like maybe I can pick it up a little bit.
Okay.
Because like you said, like especially in a trail race, like you can have back to back. You could go from a 25-minute kilometer and then run a 4-minute kilometer the next kilometer, just based on whether you're going uphill, downhill, technical. Like if you're crawling through bushes and rivers, like obviously you're slow.
Yeah.
But generally, like, yeah, if I feel, I like using my heart rate. So usually I use my heart rate for when I'm going uphill. So I know.
To make sure you're not going too fast.
Yeah, to make sure I don't go too hard. So that's kind of like a good judge for the uphill.
Yeah.
For downhill, generally speaking, I just try and keep things smooth. So smooth and efficient.
Yeah.
Because you can really pound your legs on a downhill, and that doesn't help you in the long run.
All the braking forces.
Yeah, exactly. So try and make it so that like you're rolling over and you're not braking too much.
Yeah.
But in terms of like actual pace, like on flats, like there's certain things that I know is like a pace for me to be running when it's flat terrain in say a 100-mile race.
Yeah.
So similar to like if you're running a marathon, so I'd kind of have those bumpers.
So you're looking at your watch pretty often.
Yeah, like usually I'll leave my auto laps per kilometer on.
Yeah.
So I don't look at it like constantly, but like if I know I was on pretty flat terrain, when it auto laps, I'll look down to see what what that kilometer was.
Yeah.
And if it's within a window that, I feel is good, then like I'll stick with that.
And then what about races when there's not enough battery in your watch? I guess.
Yeah, so I haven't had that happen.
No, okay.
No, there's only one race, but I had it had gone south, so it was just survival anyways, so it didn't really matter. Yeah. But otherwise, I've always just made sure I've had a watch that would be long enough to like make it through the race, or I've had a battery pack that I could like charge it up.
Yeah.
And charge it in a spot where like the pace didn't really matter.
Yeah. So going back just to the start of the conversation where, you said, the 400-meter race is the worst race out there. But just give some context around you're out there in a 100-mile race. Like there's ups and downs and how you're feeling. What those downs, what does that feel like compared to, you're just fully empty from your anaerobic system?
Yeah.
Like what does that actually feel like?
Yeah, like I guess that's like what's the worst, like what is the worst feeling, right?
What is
Because they're two different things.
Yeah.
So I find with something like a 400-meter race, like it's short, it's going to be over, but it's just excruciating the whole time through. And then so I find it's harder to like be at that like peak top speed and like hold that when there's so much like pain and you're about to throw up and like your heart's beating out of your chest and like all these different things. Like that whole experience I find hard.
Yeah.
And like because you're trying to just talk yourself through like keeping a good form and staying efficient and pushing hard for that last 10 seconds.
So even though it's short, it's still just excruciating.
It's excruciating. Whereas again, like the long distance stuff is kind of like it's a slow burn. So like you can feel these things coming, like you can usually see when there's a low coming and all of that. And I think just from experience and this is where it's, psychologically I'm really strong, and that's what has given me, I think, the most of the success that I've ended up having in ultra running and ultra racing is just that ability to kind of like keep things even keeled, that like the lows can be super, super low. There's been plenty of times I've been in tears in the middle of the wilderness by myself of like giving up, like can't keep doing this. And then 10 minutes later, you're running again, 4.5 minute kilometers or something. So there's just like a certain psychological aspect of being able to like talk yourself through those moments. Use like when you're in that long situation, you can use more tools, you know, like you can use things like you can distract yourself from it. You can like just focus on process of like, oh, like I feel really bad, but why do I feel bad? And solve your way through it. Which then like they're really low, they're really awful, but you can work through that. And you always know that there's going to be something positive on the other side of it. Whereas that 400 meter, there's none of that. It's just the release is the getting to the finish line, but you still have to get there.
I think this is still something I have trouble wrapping my head around. In a race that long, you know, on kilometer 30 out of 100, you can feel bad or like be in a low spot, but then still have confidence that you're going to be able to come out of it. I guess that would be the experience. But I can imagine even in the first time, you're like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm not fit enough. I feel like, shit, how am I going to feel good 10 minutes from now? Is it just going through those lows enough that you kind of just, well, I just got to keep through it and keep my legs moving and I'll feel better a little bit later?
Yeah.
It's
essentially that. And then like, and I think again, like talking to sort of my progression through endurance sports is that all these things happen as soon as you do something more than a 400 meter where it's just like, all out the whole time and there's pacing involved and all of that. There's always those opportunities where you're going to like have those doubts. You're going to have those low spots. If it's say an hour-long race, they're going to not be as extreme and maybe there's just one of them.
Yeah.
But like you kind of build this repertoire of like getting through those lows and then getting to the finish line. And almost every race when you get to the finish line, no matter how awful you felt at some point during the race, you get there and you're like, I probably could have went a little bit harder. And because like you made it to the finish line and like
and
even though you thought you were going to die when you're out like 2/3 of the way through.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like slowly teaching your brain and your body over time that like this is just part of it, is that like you're going to have those lows. So like just work through the lows and then there's always a high. There's always that point that's going to come around. So again, like in the ultras, you're just getting to much more extreme situations where, you know, like I always kind of picture like there's like a slow variation at the beginning and then you're getting like these really low lows, really high highs, and you're really just hanging on. But like over time, when you're doing longer and longer races, you've done a lot of these like little highs and lows that prepare you for the bigger ones, that prepare you for those like super dark moments where like you have no hope and you're just like, well, like, you know, let's just try drinking a Coke. I'll walk for 500 meters and then we'll try running and get going again.
Yeah. I want to spend a little bit more time on these lows. So what are some tactics and strategies that you work through? So you already finished your Coke. You've got no Coke.
Well, then you just sit down and you give up. No, so I think in terms of lows, like the number one thing in endurance, like these ultra endurance events, is it's almost always low blood sugar. 90% of the time. Like most of the time you just got to like eat something and drink something and you're going to feel much, much better. Yeah. So that's always the first line of defense. So like if you have a Coke, you drink the Coke. Yeah. If you have a gel, like whatever it might be. Yeah. So that's sort of the first thing. And then from there, like again, usually like what I try and focus mostly on is process type stuff. So I'll like get in some fluid and food, and then so you know you're taking care of like two of the most important just like basic functions. If you don't have either of those, you're in trouble. Yeah. Then you might start thinking about, like you mentioned, like salt tabs, like am I low on electrolytes? And then if I'm low on electrolytes, maybe I can, you know, take in some salt tabs or whatever that looks like. You can think, am I really hot? Is that what the issue is? Like I've been in the baking sun, am I just overheating? And then you can work through strategies for that of like, if you know a course, you know, there's water coming up, you can
it's almost always just working through the physiological stuff that is putting you in that place and then just trying to whack-a-mole.
Yeah. And then usually while try and tell myself, it depends on how low the low is. It's just like, we'll just keep running. And like, even if it's slow, just keep running. Yeah. And like, when we'll problem solve while we're just slowly running. Yeah. And then like, you're still moving forward. So like, that's a nice feeling. Yeah. If those things don't work, then like and I try and do this sort of all the time, but it's most important in the lows is to like stay kind of in the moment. Because what you really don't want to have happen is that runaway train of catastrophizing where it's like, at 1 second, you're just like, oh, my legs hurt. And then it turns into, I've got 87 kilometers to go. I've got 3 mountains to run over. Like there's no way I'm going to finish this. And you get into this just like really bad mindset.
Yeah.
But if you just focus on like, what can I do right now?
Yeah.
Like what's a goal that I could do in the very short term? So like when I used to do Ironman racing, I remember racing in Hawaii, which is like you're in this lava field, you're just roasting in the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just try and make it to like the next telephone pole. And like there's like a 8-kilometer stretch on the way back to town. And like just run to that telephone pole, like hold that pace till the telephone pole.
Yeah.
And if you still can't do it, we'll stop at that pole. And you get to the pole and you're like, okay, I can do one more telephone pole. And you just count your way through the telephone poles. So like using that sort of strategy works in any of these races where it's like you have to like shrink down the kind of scope of what you're working on. Because if you have like a much smaller piece to chew off.
So yeah, how big is this scope? So let's say
depends on how low the low is. So if it's really bad, it's a telephone pole. So like, which is, I don't know the actual distance, but probably 50 meters, 40 meters. But if it's like kind of a low, then maybe like in a trail situation, you can see the next climb. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, like let's walk this uphill. And then when we get to the top of the climb, like we're at the top, we can start running on the down. And then just try and work through that. Like anything that you can just pick up off the trail of like a visual marker. Or if you have your watch on, be like, okay, just like run till it clicks over the next kilometer. That's only in 230 meters. Yeah. And then just like get through that. And again, usually it's low blood sugar or hydration. So if you've taken in that food and drink and you focus on that, just get a little bit further. If you can do that a little bit further for just 10 minutes, 15 minutes, the sugar soaks in, start feeling better, you're a little bit more hydrated, and then like you start turning around like, okay, like, yeah, now I can start thinking about it's 8 kilometers to the next checkpoint or whatever, and you can start, getting back into the rhythm.
Amazing. Okay. This is like, very good tangible stuff. So hallucinations during ultras have almost become like this very documented phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And have you had any? And what does this feel like? Because it's, I'm sure for the first few runners when it happens and nobody really told them it was going to happen, it's got to be really scary.
Shocking.
Shocking. But now it's like it's so well documented that you probably even just expect it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like what have you seen? What is this experience?
Yeah, so really good question. And this was something that once I got into the ultra world and like it really piqued my interest in like a very sadistic, I guess, way, but piqued my interest of just like, I wonder what it takes to like run so long that you start hallucinating. And then so for me, I did a 200-mile race about a year ago now in southern Alberta. And then in that one, it was overnight on the second night. So it took just under 50 hours to do the whole race and about like ballpark somewhere around 40-ish hours into the race with essentially no sleep. I didn't fall asleep at any point in those 40 hours. I've been running straight. I was running with a friend of mine was nice enough to join me for the last 80K of this race, Rainier, just out in the wilderness and on a Wednesday night or whatever it was. But yeah, that's good friendship there. Yeah. And so we were out and we were on this like long straight where it's just kind of like a dirt road. And then I was starting to notice, like, as we were running along, like, there would be little bushes on the side, and I kept thinking they were coiled snakes. So I'd kind of, like, be a little bit scared, but then it would just, like, be a bush. And I was like, oh, okay, that's weird. But it was just kind of those things you'd, like, misrecognize something because you're in a headlamp and can't really see everything. Yeah. And then I remembered I stopped to pee in a bush, and then I was, like, kind of just looking into the forest with my headlamp, and, like, and all the leaves were just kind of, like, moving and floating around. And then that's when I had turned to him and I was like, Rainier, I think I'm like starting to see stuff a little bit. And he was great. He was super calm. He's just like, that's cool. Like everything else is good. I'm like, yeah, I'm still good to run and stuff. He's like, okay, like we're good. We'll work through it. So it was just like these little things. And then the like true like hallucination I had in that race was we were getting close. My wife was there as the crew. So would be there in our SUV and had our dog with us. And, I knew we were getting close. It was within maybe a kilometer or something or a mile till we were going to see her. Yeah. And I stopped because at one point I saw a woman and a dog walking in front of us on the road. And this was, maybe 20 meters down the road or something. But like vividly saw them walking across the road and I stopped. And then, my buddy Rainier's just like, what's going on? And I was like, well, who is that walking across the street? And he just kind of like looked at me just like there is no one there. And then it just kind of like poofed and like floated away. And then where I was looking, there was a reflection off of a sign that was like kind of over a hump. So it looked like it was like on the road. But my brain had turned that into a woman walking her dog, which also, like, being so close to my wife, I'm sure was my brain anticipating seeing her. But that was like a vivid, like, I saw this as if it was real. And then that's when it's just like, I think I need to try and sleep when we when we get to the car. But yeah, so that's the only time I've had like a true hallucination, was getting to a race of that length.
Yeah.
Besides like the usual, like in the middle of the night, it's 3 a.m, you've been running for 20 hours and your headlamp sees like a black like lump and you think it's a bear.
Yeah.
And then you look at it and you're like, that's not a bear. Or you hear something in the woods and you're like, is that a bear? And no, it's not a bear. But I think that those aren't like, to me, those aren't true hallucinations.
Yeah. What is it like to run in the middle of the night? I've never done it.
No.
No.
You should. I'd recommend it.
Okay.
It's very peaceful for sure. The first time I ever ran in the night, it was a race that starts before sunrise. And it was snowing, so like it was snow at night, and it was pretty amazing, to be honest. Like it was just like, because there's not a lot of sound, there's not too much stimulus from things around you, so it's just like, it's very peaceful. Technically, it's a little bit harder because you got to watch where you're stepping, and especially if you're on technical descents or something like that, like you're trying to like watch through these shadows, and there could be dust and all of that make it a little bit more challenging. But you just kind of have to like keep your head pretty alert. I've gotten better at just like telling myself constantly, like, keep paying attention. Because in this daylight, if your mind starts wandering, like, it doesn't really matter. You're getting so much information that like you're gonna know when there's something to avoid. But in the night, it's just a lot easier to make a mistake, and they have consequences.
Do you find you do make more mistakes in the middle, or are you actually just more attuned that you don't take as many risks? Yeah,
so like my worst situations have all happened at night, so I'm sure it's a consequence of that. So I've dislocated my shoulder twice now in races in the night.
Yeah.
Where it was just like a fall gone wrong.
Yeah.
And you're probably a little bit more likely to trip, but typically I'm starting to get to the point that I know that I have to pay more attention at night. So you're extra alert. So you're like a little bit more in tune.
Yeah.
And then like if it is technical, I'll let myself slow down a little bit, because it's like, it's not worth the injury if you like try and like really hammer a section. Whereas during daytime, you might be like, I really still have to keep this pace up and I can see everything, so I'll keep running. So
how many times do you fall in an average 100-mile race?
Usually like once.
Once? Okay.
Yeah. The like UTMB didn't fall at all. So that was probably the first 100-miler I didn't fall.
Yeah.
But usually at least once. And like most of the time it's like something silly. Like usually you fall where it's flat, non-technical, and it's because you let your guard down and you let your brain relax a little bit.
Yeah.
And then you just like clip a toe or something and then just do a little slide and get up and brush off the dirt and keep going.
Yeah. Okay. When did you decide, okay, I need to qualify for UTMB? And what is the process? And was it kind of after you had this fantastic season in 2023? Like, or is it, again, it's like you're always on to the next thing. So it was kind of, you had your sights set on it. Yeah. Walk me through that story.
Yeah. So for UTMB, it was always something that was kind of out there as a possibility because it's such an iconic race.
Yeah.
To be honest, my wife wanted me to do it more than I wanted to do it when we were going through this. Yeah. She just really wanted to go to Chamonix and had like known about UTMB for years and just like loved the idea of it being able to experience that. So I would say that she was as much of a factor in figuring out to do this as anything.
Okay.
And then just like timing worked out really well that, like a friend of mine, a good training buddy, was interested in trying to do UTMB so we could do the whole kind of training build together. Kind of like with family life situation, things worked out really well in terms of the timing to do it this year. And and then so in terms of qualifying, there's two paths. You can either go through a lottery, which is you have no control over, or you can qualify through one of the races, UTMB races. So usually there's the top one or two people will automatically qualify. And then they have something called majors, which the top 10 qualify through. Okay. And then the race I did in April, which was Canyons in California, it had top 10 in men and women, would automatically qualify for UTMB. Okay. So it was one where the timing works out pretty well. For us, it was only, my buddy Chris flew down for it as well. Yeah. So for us, it was a 2.5-hour flight to flying to San Francisco on a short drive. Like it's just logistically was easy. And it was early enough in the season we could like qualify and then build up into the race for UTMB.
Got it. So you have a good finish there, and then describe the event. Describe UTMB. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure the coolest ultra race you could ever do. Because and especially I think looking at North America, how races go versus in Europe. So in Europe, that's just more of a culture for it to begin with.
Yeah.
But here, that's like you see no one all day. There's like a few volunteers that you meet along the way. Like I get to see my wife every once in a while, but then you get to the finish line at like 2 a.m, and like whether you're just like finishing the race or winning the race, like it's just like you and your one person at the finish line. You're kind of like high five and eat a bowl of soup, and it's like, well, like, let's just go to bed. But you're just kind of like doing this thing all by yourself. Like not to say it's a very supportive community, but it's just like there's
not a lot of people there.
It's not thousands of fans out like lining the trails, but
it's not quite as sparse probably as the Barclays, but it's like not far off.
But it's not like doing like the Berlin Marathon or New York Marathon where you've got thousands of people lining the streets, right? So, so that's more what I'm used to from Canada. And then so going over to Europe and UTMB, like at the start of the race, first of all, you have 3,000 people that are starting the race, which again, typically here you've got a couple hundred, few hundred maybe. So you're 10 times the people just doing the race. So it's like this huge crowd that's all there. Chamonix is a relatively small town. So even building up to the race, like you can just feel the vibe, like everyone's there and trail runners and coming out off the trail somewhere and like picking up a baguette with like throw it in their back of their running pack and stuff. Like it's just like everything's about trail running.
Yeah.
And so when you kick off the race, like not only are you in this like beautiful mountain town, you've got Mont Blanc and the Mont Blanc Massif in the background, glaciers and that beauty. Yeah. But then you've got like 5 to 10 people on each side lining the whole first 2K, 2.5K of the race course.
It's almost like Tour de France vibes.
Yeah, like just people screaming and yelling and all of that. And that was just like the beginning. And you're in an actual crowd, which again doesn't happen in a normal race. Like usually it's just like, you're kind of like up. For me, just like out and on your own and like just running. Yeah. This is like there's always people around you. And then when we there's like the first climb that was near town, and again there was like quite a few people just like cheering the whole way up, which was cool. But then we dropped into the first town, and there was 5,000 or 10,000 people on the streets with like just like everything you could imagine, like big horns and people doing the wave as you go by, and like everyone's like screaming at you, and they have like the barriers to like make sure that people aren't getting onto the course. And there's just like a huge amount of energy and vibe from that. Yeah. And then my favorite part of the race was then like maybe an hour or two after that, where we went, there was a not quite single track, but like a trail that was going up this climb on the way over to Italy. And again, there was thousands of people probably on this climb, where it was Tour de France style. Like they were closed in on front of you on the trail, and they would just separate as you got to them, and just like screaming and cheering. And there's like colored smoke bombs going off, and there's people that have like generators to play like EDM music, and there's like a dance party going on, and there's people singing and like high fives, and everyone's like slapping you on the back as you run by. It was just like an absolutely incredible experience. It was super motivating and just like really cool to like get that much support in an ultra marathon, which is usually again just you out alone for 18 hours, and then you get home and give your wife a hug. And it was like that the whole way through. So every time you get to, there was tons of cheering and crowds, and then getting to the finish line, again, there was like hundreds of people that were still lining through the town, cheering you on, and a big finish line and everything. Like, all that was just great. Not to mention the beauty and the everything else about
the actual
running
place, there. Yeah. And how did the actual race go for you this year?
Yeah, not great. Not great. So I ended up, I was there running with my buddy Chris, and so I got sick during the race. Like, so I had a cold like come on, or some sort of virus during the race. So no signs of it before? Yeah, I was feeling pretty good before, but started the race, and then my heart rate was like 30 beats per minute higher than it should have been, for given like the pace we were running at, and the elevation's lower than Calgary that we started at. So it wasn't like elevation or anything. But usually I'd be at like 125 beats per minute for what we were running, and I was more like in the low 150s. And so I was like, this is weird, and kind of thought maybe it was just the excitement and the atmosphere. But then by the end of that first climb and like we were descending into that first town, like in my mind, I already thought like, no, I'm like, this is a DNF day. Like there's no way I can keep doing this.
Yeah.
And so at about, it was about half marathon and like 20 or 22K in was where we got to this town. And I was running with my buddy Chris, and I was kind of getting ready to tell him like, you just go, like I'm going to try and get through this, but like don't know.
Yeah.
And then he kind of stopped me and he had to start dry heaving on the side of the road. We were staying together, so we assumed that we both had whatever this virus was and we're sick. And then kind of like, how are you doing? And he's like, I don't think I'm finishing this race. And in hindsight, he'd said he'd already like talked himself to DNF and everything. And I was essentially the same way. But then we were like, well, like we trained all year for this. We put in so much time.
Let's just run to that
Let's
telephone
go to that
pole.
telephone pole. We were like, we trained so much for this. We put so much into this. And it's like, this is like UTMB. Like we should try and finish. So we just kind of made a pact of like, whatever we need to do to finish, we'll do. Like if it means walking the whole thing, like we'll walk it.
Yeah.
And then we just used all those tools of like one step at a time, trying to stay fueled and hydrated and doing everything we could for our bodies and just like, worked through the race the best we could. So we ended up being about 4.5 hours slower than we expected. And not quite. It wasn't a performance day, but It was a really good experience day.
I was going to say, like, what did it feel good to still finish based on, like you don't know what's going to happen in a race, obviously, like you've got all these variables. So,
yeah. And so like it was in the moment, it's always like upsetting because, you know, like you prepared for this and then like you have in your mind like how it's going to go and like you're trying to like pump yourself up in the days, weeks, months before of like what this race is going to be. And then when you don't have that, like it's a kick in the stomach for sure. Yeah. But like all that being said, like it was really nice that like it created the situation where there was no pressure in terms of the race. And then so for like, I did the whole thing with my buddy Chris, and then like, it was just great to be able to have that shared experience as well that might have unfolded in different ways had we not both been having a bad day. So, and this might just be from doing a lot of these and maturity and life moving on. But ultimately, I think it was probably just for the best. We weren't going to win the race. Like that was never an option or like a possibility. So I think we got a lot out of it in terms of just like, that shared experience, a little bit of trauma bonding of going through it. And it's those situations where things don't go well that I find are the most rewarding afterwards. So it's like that type 2 fun where it's like, it's not fun while you're doing it, but when you look back at it, it's like, oh, like that was amazing. Yeah. Being able to look at something and say, we were 20 kilometers in, we'd done 800 meters of elevation gain. We still had over 9 kilometers of elevation gain and 150 plus kilometers of running. And we were at the point that we were fully done. Like legs were done, body was done, like, sore throat, like congestion, like just feeling awful. Yeah. And then being able to go through 150 kilometers in the, like the French, Swiss, and Italian Alps is like, it just feels really good to have gone through it and out the other side. So.
And so do you feel like you have unfinished business there, or there's just lots of other interesting races? Like,
like I think there'll always be the like the what if and like the want to go back there. Yeah. I think it'll depend just on like more of like family and life circumstances. We're expecting our first baby in 2 weeks.
Oh,
so
cool. Congrats.
Gonna have a little baby on the way. So that's gonna, I think, change the like kind of setup and dynamic of preparing for all of these. So it might be hard to do the amount of training that I've done in preparation for previous races. So a little bit of unfinished business, but also like the experience was what I wanted out of it. And I did get the experience. I got to see it all, got the cheering fans, got the experience of running through that area and the hype of the race, which was really cool. So it'd be great to go back someday. But if I don't, I'll still feel like I've checked that box in my life.
And then I guess what's next for the 2025 season? I guess it's fluid at this point.
To be determined at this point. Yeah. So kind of wait and see how it goes. Like I think it'd be fun and like most likely to do something closer to home, but do something like the Canadian Death Race or something like that. Like that one I had done a few years ago and didn't have a great race. That could be like a good, like fun way to, go back and challenge that course again. Yeah. Talked a little bit about maybe doing like a relay at a race like Sinister 7 as well. And I think it'll be a little bit more just like see how things go. Yeah. Got it. Yeah. A lot of moving parts.
And so let's say you're a novice runner. This all seems like quite intimidating. Mm-hmm. how would you recommend going about it? Yeah. So let's say you've done some 10Ks, you've maybe done some half marathons. Like, what would be some natural progressions in and around Calgary, just races and
Yeah, things like that.
Yeah.
So the two biggest things is I'll talk to, like, especially like at work, like I don't work in an industry related to sports. Like when I tell people what I do and for fun, like I was telling people I was going on vacation and they found out that I was doing UTMB and like they all were in shock of like, that's not a vacation, but it's like, it's all relative to what you're doing.
Yeah.
But like for someone that's like hasn't done anything like this, and even for someone that's like just getting into it, like the two big things I would say, like one, find a part of it that you're passionate about. Everyone's got their own interests and goals and everything. So, try a little bit of running on the trail, try running on the road, like see which one you like more. They both have their pros and cons.
Yeah.
I find generally signing up for something is the best way to stay motivated.
Yeah.
So I have something on the horizon. So whether that's something local, like doing like the one of the Calgary Marathon Day races where it's, again, road race, super controlled conditions.
Yeah.
You can just pick a distance that's going to push your boundaries a little bit. Or like there's trail races like the 5 Peaks races that are around Calgary that are relatively short trail races to get you into it, or days like I'd mentioned the Sinister 7 race, like they've got a whole slew of different distances.
Yep.
Like, so there's some good races out there where you can pick something to challenge you.
Yep.
Again, from my experience, I like something that's, it's like we talked about SMART goals, like something that's going to be specific and achievable and just be outside your comfort zone is a good goal. Like don't immediately sign up for 100-mile because you're like, oh, that sounds so cool. That's great if you can do it. But like if you set yourself up for failure, it's going to be really tough.
Yep.
But yeah, and then beyond that, the biggest advice is like find something that you're going to consistently do. So much of like what we read in terms of racing, performance, health, like anything like that.
Yeah.
So much of it's based on the last 2% of success. And then so like when I was talking a little bit about like what I do for a training program, sure, there's like a speed tempo workout during the week. There's big miles on the weekend. But most of the miles, it's just about getting out and running and like being able to lace up your shoes and go for a run.
Yeah.
And then more and more sort of as I've, just had more experience and been through more, like I've always just realized it's like all that matters is running. So like if you just get out and run and you plan to do 25K and you only did 8, like whatever, you still got out and ran.
Yeah.
And like you're still,
tomorrow,
and there's going to be a next day and like you're still creating a stimulus for your body. If 8's all you could do on that day, like that's still probably pushed your body in some way.
Yeah.
So I think it's important not to like contextualize this and saying like, oh, I'm only training for a 5K or I'm only training for a 10K. Like it's not that much.
Yeah.
It's like everyone has a different baseline, but just like whatever it takes for you to get to that, like just focus on being consistent and then worry about those like details of like how to get in these nitty gritty things afterwards. So don't overthink it. And the important thing is just like get out and move.
Get out and move.
Yeah.
Perfect. Amazing. This is a great conversation, Scott. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, happy to.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Energy Untold. Energy Untold is produced by Shortline Creative and recorded at GBE Energy. Art is curated with the assistance of Norbert Hall. For more information on the show, visit energyuntold.com. We would love your feedback. Send us a message at hello@energyuntold.com. Thank you again, and until next time, I am Corey Paddock.